don't want to get into a clash of personalities, which sometimes we're prone to do on YouTube to create drama. I'm going to look at the controversy mainly. So there will be minor spoilers, not a lot of it. I just want to talk about this particular section, which is controversial, and there is a pro and con side. But I do think, to be honest, and I do like her, I do like this YouTuber, but for the most part she's fair. But I think here she badly misinterpreted what happened. I will say, though, the general video overall was strong. I do think she brought up some good complaints. I don't think she's correct, but I think I was going with her for most of the video. But that particular section she talked about, I think you wildly misinterpreted what happened. We'll put that aside. We'll get into the controversy section where Kvote, for lack of a better word, is seduced into doing certain things sexually, and she reacted very violently against
her only characteristic. And then he's able to get free of her clutches, and he's no longer mind controlled, and he's of sound mind, but he decides to stick around because free lovemaking. And he learns the ways of how to satisfy a woman. She teaches him those ways, which, by the way, hilarious scene when when he admits that he's a virgin, or was, and she can't believe it. She's baffled because he was so good in bed. How can he be a virgin? So he spends all this time with the fairy lady. In this time, he visits a tree who tells him that Denna is being physically abused by her patron and she is in distress, which absolutely demolishes Kvote, understandably. And then he stays with the fairy some more time because of reasons. Then he gets out of the fairy's clutches because he sings her a song, and she finds that she can't be compared because he's a virgin. And so she lets him free, rather than, because usually this fairy, when she gets a man in her clutches, she has sex with him until he loses his mind. But with Kvote, she lets him go free because he's never been with another woman. So he doesn't have anything to compare her with. So she lets him go free so that he can be free to have sex with plenty of mortal women so that he can see that she's the best. And then he's going to be forced to come back into her clutches. We'll come back here. Then
her construction of how what happened with the fairy or the fae happened as it did. I guess you could have a lot of problems with book 2, that's fair, even with the female characters. And of course, I'm speaking as a man, so obviously as a man and a male reader, yeah, I don't have a lot of problems with what Roth. It is fairly sexually explicit, that is true, but I think her way of framing it as it's just sex fantasy, it's just very pornographic, I think she missed the bigger point, which is that Kvote, from a certain sense, yes, he's definitely enjoying what happened, but it's a very deadly game. I guess, yes, he's having this, quote, great sex. He's in this fantastic realm, and she's framing it like, oh, he doesn't want to leave, but he's going to leave. No, he's seduced by what he's being shown, and it's a really wonderful, crazy realm. However, he is technically a slave. I guess from my reading of it, he is not free. He is very much imprisoned. What is happening is a seduction game from both ends, where he's trying to convince the fairy to let him go. And there's a free will versus determinism debate. I'm not going to get into that. It's going to get really tricky. And if you see the mythology and read up on it, yes, this actually does happen. And she's emphasizing the sex fantasy part, which I don't have a problem with. If that's what he was up to, I don't really care. I think with the story it makes sense. The whole point of Kvote is he's a very mythical being. He's giving all these myths about himself and what is happening to him. And people seem to assume he's lying or even exaggerating, but sometimes I think he's being brutally honest. So from his perspective, being very sexually naive, to be overwhelmed sexually by the Fae is, yes, incredible and exciting. However, it is very dangerous. It is not, quote, enjoyable in the sense that he's just having sex and he's fully enjoying the physical pleasure and that's all there is to it. It's more complicated than that. There's a lot of things going beneath the surface with the text with these books. I think my issue with her is she's reading this at the surface level in terms of the plot. Well, not much is happening with the plot, and that's a fair criticism of book 2, but so what? Why does that matter? The question is, what is the story? And the story is Kvote relating these life episodes to the chronicler, and we're engaged in that debate back and forth. And we can't fully trust Kvote, and we really can't trust the chronicler. We have this omniscient narrator in the background as well. That's what he's playing with. He's playing with this style about who is telling the truth, what is their perspective, and why do they want to tell these stories. So in this section, she's reading it as sexual conquest. I'm not reading it like that. It feels more like, with a lot of these books, Kvote is kind of like a lucky fool. He's very talented, but he gets in over his head, and he's sort of just a moron who accidentally trips into this incredible adventure. And yes, it's very erotic, and it can be very enjoyable from one angle, but from another angle, he really got himself into a really big trap, and he's trying to figure out how to get out of it. Yes, it feels from one angle, really, being, I don't know, fated to have great fairy sex. How bad could that be? But again, you are technically still a slave. I don't think that's what he wants with his life. I will say to finish, though, that yes, I do agree that if you are a female reader, there's a lot of female characters in these stories that he's giving that are fairly disappointing. They're kind of like just very tropish. They're not very interesting. They don't really have much of an interior life. I think Denna is probably one of the biggest disappointments if you read these books. However, that doesn't mean every female character, it doesn't mean every sexual encounter is from this pornographic point of view. I think Rothfuss is doing more than that. There's a lot going on beneath the surface. There's a lot of games and paradoxes with the writing. But I do respect people who didn't like the section. They just thought it was like a mindless, meandering, pointless thing, and the plot itself was very weak. But I read it as a very interesting set of mysteries and paradoxes that he's setting up. We're going to wait for book 3 whether he resolves it, but even though it is done in the format of a sexual fantasy, I think a lot more is going on, playing with our expectations of what we think a sex fantasy should be or will be with, quote, fairies. You know, if you play the Zelda games, fairies are very nice, they're helping you out, they're fulfilling your life and all that kind of stuff. That's not this kind of fairy. It's a very scary, horrific sexual encounter. It may, quote, be narrated in a way that feels wonderful, but I don't think that's the point of that section.